Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I unfortunately have more nightmare stories to share with you about women suffering and women dying because of Donald Trump's abortion ban and this ridiculous idea of allowing the states, allowing state governments, allowing strangers, your neighbors, to dictate what a woman can and can't do, their healthcare decisions. It's absurd. So, ABC News recently reported there was an Idaho woman who was, quote, passed around like a hot potato due to her state's archaic and cruel abortion law. So, the details of her story have come out because a lawsuit has been filed now by two doctors and four women. So, Dr. Julie Lyons is one of the two doctors. She testified in court that there was a woman who appeared at the hospital where she was working. She was 14 weeks pregnant. She comes into the emergency room, and Dr. Lyons said the woman, quote, had developed a massive subchorionic hemorrhage. That's where the placenta rips off the side of the uterus, and she had developed this earlier in the week and had been into the emergency room several times. The doctor also said, quote, this patient had become increasingly anemic. She had incurred 3 visits to our ER, multiple lab tests. I was working with some amazing nurses, and we decided as a team that we were going to break our hospital's rules and admit her, even though she wasn't 20 weeks pregnant, because I just couldn't send her home again and hope for the best. So they rightfully, luckily made the decision because this woman was, quote, heavily bleeding, and she had been told the pregnancy wasn't viable. But she had been to the emergency room 4 times and no one would help her. So Dr. Lyons explained that doctors' fears of even mentioning the word abortion are so great that they won't help anyone. They just are frozen. They refuse to do anything. On the witness stand, she said, quote, my colleagues are so scared and confused to even mention the word. It's like a hot potato. Pass the patient around and hopefully something will happen and declare itself. So Dr. Lyons and the nurses finally admitted this woman. They put her in the labor and delivery unit, and they said that several hours later she aborted the fetus, but the woman had bled so much that she had to have a blood transfusion. 4 female patients also testified, and they shared their horror stories of being denied care, even though their fetuses had no chance of survival. And then the other physician plaintiff told the court that they've had to transfer women to other states by plane so that they can receive the care they need. So these women were the lucky ones. These are the ones who survived. As I've shared with you guys, there are women who are dying because of Trump's abortion ban. And we just found out about another one, another young mother who passed away in Texas in June of 2023. So this was 35-year-old Portia Ngumezi, I think, I don't know, Ngumezi. So I'm probably butchering it, but I'm going to go with Ngumezi. Anyway, she was 11 weeks pregnant. She started to miscarry. So she went to the hospital, and over a 6-hour period, she bled so much that she needed 2 transfusions. So her husband contacted his mother because his mother used to be a physician. His mother tells him she needs a D&C. So D and C, the letters D and C. She said, she has to have the leftover tissue removed from her uterus. And she said, if they do this, which is a very common, very simple procedure, the bleeding will stop. Well, the obstetrician who was on duty decided no. He said, well, we have a policy at our hospital that we are first to administer the drug called misoprostol. So basically this misoprostol or prostol, I don't know how you pronounce that either. Basically, it allows the body to just pass the remaining tissue by itself. So Portia takes this medication. She continues to bleed profusely. And a nurse even noted in her file that she was, quote, continuing to pass large clots the size of grapefruit. So she was also complaining of chest pain. And apparently, according to doctors who reviewed her file, that is like a huge red flag. She should have been taken in for more tests. Not only did they not do that, but they did nothing to address the symptoms whatsoever. And the doctor goes back and writes that, oh, yeah, she wasn't bleeding that heavily. Yeah, it was, we were monitoring her symptoms and everything seemed normal. No, the nurses flat out said, passing blood clots the size of grapefruit. So this doctor is completely, it seems like lying, trying to CYA and say, oh no, she nothing abnormal. Don't know why she ended up dying. So tragically, 3 hours after they gave her that pill, her heart stopped and she died. So ProPublica news outlet provided Portia's medical records to over 12 doctors, and they determined that Portia's death was completely preventable. The medical expert said she was hemorrhaging, and in her medical history, it showed, and the doctors at the hospital should have known, she has a blood clotting disorder. So that made her situation even more dire. And an OBGYN from New Mexico told ProPublica, quote, misoprostol at 11 weeks is not going to work fast enough. The patient will continue to bleed and have a higher risk of going into hemorrhagic stroke. So Portia and her husband wanted this baby. This was not a case of a woman who was just choosing to have an abortion. But when the hospital conducted an ultrasound, they said, there is no baby. The hospital report says that there was a, quote, sac-like structure. There was no fetus. There was no heartbeat. So she died all because right-wing psychos think that they should be able to tell women what they can and can't do with their bodies. This wasn't about saving a baby. There was no baby. So now her 2 young sons, because they already have children, they have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old at the time she passed away, they now have to grow up without their mother. And this is the 5th case that's been reported by ProPublica of a completely unnecessary death of a pregnant woman. So medical professionals, you would think, right, they want to get to the bottom of this. They want to figure this out. The whole purpose of these laws, the whole reason they were put in place was to, quote unquote, save lives, right? So they're highly concerned, of course, about women receiving the best care to preserve their lives, I'm sure, since this is all about life, right? All about the sanctity of life. Yeah, no, you would be wrong if you thought that, because the Texas Maternal Mortality and Morbidity Review Committee, this is the committee that is supposed to review these cases and determine what went wrong, how we can do things better, how we can prevent deaths in the future. Yeah, they just announced they're not going to be reviewing any pregnancy-related deaths that occurred after they disbanded, after they overturned Roe versus Wade. So anything that happened, any of the deaths that occurred in 2022 and 2023, not going to look at them. No, we're just going to set those aside and go from here. And remember, Texas enacted the first iteration of their abortion ban even before the federal law was overturned. It was in 2021, late 2021. So it seems they just want to sweep these early deaths under the rug. And not all of the committee members agree with this. So one of them spoke anonymously with the Washington Post, and they said, quote, "If women are dying because of delays, and we have this huge new policy in Texas that affects their lives, why would we skip over those years?" And this isn't the only state where this is happening and where it appears that they're trying to cover things up and cover up their crimes against women. The Republican majority, their legislature in Idaho, they dismantled their state's maternal mortality committee in 2023. And you will never guess why. It's because members of the committee recommended that Idaho expand Medicaid coverage to postpartum women. So the so-called Christian conservatives, these Republicans who are so concerned about life, saving babies, they were so outraged at the idea of helping women after they've given birth that they were like, oh, yeah, we're just going to let the whole thing peter out. We're just going to let the funding for that go. And yeah, we're not going to renew that committee. Now, luckily, the Idaho committee was resurrected this past year by some law. I guess they passed some law, and so now it's all back together. However, now all their cases are backlogged because they've just been sitting. So while women are still in that state being denied life-saving care, they're not even looking at these cases. And in Georgia, where you guys might remember, they also have an anti-woman restrictive 6-week abortion ban. It got overturned by a judge, and then it went to their Supreme Court, and they reinstated it. They also just disbanded their maternal death committee. So Georgia's public health commissioner, she blamed this on privacy concerns because she said that confidential information was shared with ProPublica by members of the committee. Now, to be fair, that does seem to be the case because ProPublica reported on the very preventable deaths of 2 Georgia women, Candy Miller, and then also another woman who I've mentioned, Amber Thurman. So I'm sure it's a source of shame for that state, and it should be. So now the health commissioner said, oh, well, we're going to put together a new committee. They're taking applications and they're going to, put together this whole new group of people. So I think it's safe to assume it's going to be packed with more hypocritical, alt-right misogynists who are going to cover for the state's failures and cover for these preventable deaths. I mean, what else are we to think, right? And yes, these committees are not supposed to share information, but they're not even allowed to share the information with the families of the deceased. And these women, their families wanted this information shared publicly. So, the committee doesn't want it, or the people in charge of the state don't want it to be shared and don't want it to be reported, but the families do. I think the families take precedence. So unbelievable that this is going on in America in the year 2024. And if Trump and JD Vance have their way, it's going to get even worse. It will be nationwide. So anyway, I will let you all know when I hear of more. Unfortunately, sadly, I believe that I will hear of more of these deaths. And as soon as I do, I will let you know, and we need to share it everywhere. Because people need to understand this has consequences, literally deadly consequences. All right. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. I know this is tough and very hard information, difficult information, heavy. But again, please share it with everyone you know. So thank you all so much again. Take care. Talk with you soon.